and WNST.net. We are getting into the weekend here, and what a week the Orioles have had in winning baseball games and doing okay and going north of the border to Canada. But meanwhile, here in the United States of America, there's a little dispute going on with Major League Baseball and Mr. Angelos and the Lerner family and the Washington Nationals. And here to fill us in on the latest left cross, if that was a right cross by Manny Machado to Yordano Ventura, it's never hands down when it comes to Peter Angelos. Eric Fisher covers all things, MASN news and Major League Baseball news and digital media and technology for Sports Business Journal. He is one of the 2 or 3 people I can historically and consistently bring onto the program here at WNST.net to give us the straight skinny on just how much money they're fighting over with Major League Baseball, the Angelos family. Eric, always a pleasure to have you in, and usually when I bring you in, it usually means Mr. Angelos is up to some shenanigans. So bring us up to speed on what's going on in the New York Supreme Court here this week.
Yes, hello again. And actually the sort of impetus was from the other side of the table. And what happened just before the Memorial Day holiday is that Major League Baseball informed the Nationals and MASN, which is obviously controlled by the Orioles, that they intend to reconvene the league's revenue sharing definitions committee. And this is the internal arbitration panel to review this long-running dispute now into year 5.
Now, there were 4 people on that, right? When you say RSDC,
3.
Right? 3. It was Mets.
It's been replaced now. It originally was Stu Sternberg, Jeff Wilpon, and Frank Coonelly, the president of the Pirates. That membership has been completely replaced now. It's now Brewers owner Mark Atanasio, Mariners president Kevin Mather, and Blue Jays president and CEO Mark Shapiro.
Who we know here in Baltimore as being a Baltimore guy, by the way. So 1/3 of that.
Absolutely, and his famous agent dad, absolutely. So that membership has been completely replaced. This is the same panel that originally ruled in favor of the Nationals. MASN successfully had that ruling vacated last fall, and what's happened since then is we essentially have multiple appeals on that ruling in terms of what happens next. MASN wants this whole situation remanded to a neutral body outside of Major League Baseball. The Nationals and MLB want this returned to the RSDC. And while that whole appeal process is unfolding, MLB is saying, well, we're just going to reconvene the RSDC again on this case anyway, and they've gone ahead and scheduled a rehearing on this in August. It's a pretty bold gambit that they've done here. And so
on the side of Major League Baseball, you mean, yes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So what we're beginning to see now is the response from the MASN side. There was a letter that was sent, and we're expecting more paperwork next week in terms of a briefing against all of this. And there's a lot that's certainly going to unfold between now and August when this supposed hearing is scheduled.
Eric Fisher joining us here from Sports Business Journal, one of the 2 or 3 people that I can have intelligent conversations with about this. And I know we go through this every time, but I think it deserves some review here, Eric, right? I mean, you and I have kind of bunkered down as compatriots in the journalism side of trying to understand this and report this. There's really not a lot of reporting of this going on in Baltimore, Washington. I hear you're on the interweb, and you have Google as well. I don't know that journalists here locally, what's left and remnants of the Tribune Empire and the Washington Post, that they really even care to cover this. And I don't know that the Nationals really want it covered, and certainly Angelos doesn't want it covered. And Major League Baseball has never, to your opinion and many others, never seen a fight like this internally over what is now well in excess of $300 million in disputed money, which is, oh, by the way, 1.5 times what Angelos paid for the franchise, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty dense stuff, and it's unfolded literally over the last 11 years, because essentially what the core argument for Angelos and MASN is that the original settlement deal from 2005 is not being honored. That's essentially his argument, and clearly there's an inverse argument on the other side that there have been new market forces that need to be taken into account. But that's unfolding over a very long period of time. And, it's admittedly hard for a lot of people to immediately grasp. But, that's what's happening. And clearly we have a very rare situation, and certainly was the case last year that for the first time in league history, Major League Baseball had been legally enjoined by one of its member clubs, and that was on that RSDC ruling before it was actually vacated. But we really are into sort of unplowed snow here in terms of this kind of legal fight at all ever in Major League Baseball history.
Well, I mean, you say the word enjoined. That is, that's a word we don't use often, and certainly amongst Major League Baseball owners, they just sued each other, right? Or they're in an entanglement here. And per the Major League Baseball rules of getting in the club, I think like one of the first rules is we don't sue each other in this here club. We're all partners. So just by suing each other, they've sort of broken the very codicils, right, and the very language of their basic agreement with each other, right?
No doubt. But, of course, the argument from the Orioles and the MASN side is that matters of internal arbitration such as this supersede a league constitution. And so, and while this whole situation is pending, that's part of why we've never seen any actual punishment levied upon either the Orioles or the Nationals. There's been some threatened along the way, but it's never actually come to pass here. Once the dust all settles on this, in some months or years down the road, we'll see if that ever does come to pass, but heretofore there has been no punishment against that rule levied upon either club.
All right. Well, you used the word neutral earlier, and and I've gone back to this a few times with you. With Tom Boswell was the first person. I know you were working at the Washington Times. You were the one. I've done all the research. You were the one that discovered the $75 million sort of lump sum payment that the Orioles got in the beginning of this thing and reported it. But Boswell, the day that this word went down, and Angelos took out the big full page ad in the Washington Post that said we are prepared to pay the Nationals many millions of dollars. That's literally what the quote was, many millions of dollars in 2006. And Boswell wrote, well, who will be the one who decides what is fair and what is fair for both sides, because they both get the same amount of this revenue each year out of the local television deal? Who will be that person that decides? And I think 10 years out, 11 years out on this now, that's where we are, is who will decide. And Major League Baseball says we have the RSDC. Here they are. They will decide. And we already decided that it should have been $60 million 5 years ago. And then, then I say the Orioles are asking, or MASN is asking, or Peter is asking for neutral. What would neutral mean, Eric? I mean, if it were neutral,
they would love it. They would love it if this thing were sent to the American Arbitration Association, and you'd have some former federal judge who has absolutely no ties to not only baseball but sports at large. They would love a situation like that.
Is that a Sonia Sotomayor role like from 95, where when the union got involved, it literally, there was nobody in baseball calling the shots there, right? Just literally governmental body, right?
There would certainly be some similarities there, and that's essentially the situation that MASN's been pushing for quite some time now, and we just have an inverse push coming from the Nationals and MLB where they want to keep this thing in-house.
Well, what would be the ramification of that? I mean, look, I don't like Peter. I don't like what he's done to me. I don't like what he's done to the city. I don't like what he's doing to his partners. I don't like anything about Peter, but I would still think in a fair ruling, in a fair court, if the MASN is sitting there and making all of this money, and it's pretty obvious that Peter is trying to suppress how much money MASN even makes to some degree, because they don't really have any other programming. They have no news department. It's very sort of state-run. If you watch it, it's almost laughable, like Saturday Night Live skit, because it's made for the owner. I mean, every part of it sort of answers to the Orioles' whims. I would still think if you got together and said, well, if Washington and Baltimore, if the Houston Astros are getting $80 million out of their deal, then these franchises should be getting that kind of money too. Or if this team's getting $120 million out of their deal, how come this thing isn't throwing off that kind of revenue? It still would seem to me that Peter's, trying to deal with the world being flat in 2004, that still wouldn't sort of hold water if someone fair were to come in on the outside and divvy up the money. It certainly wouldn't be throwing off $60 million worth of profit every year just for Peter, right?
Well, there were a couple of questions in there. I guess, first off, the comparisons from market to market don't entirely hold water, because the way the settlement is constructed, the Nationals' rights and the Orioles' rights, for that matter, they're not on the open market. They're not designed to go on the open market. All these other teams, they go ahead and there are multiple bidders for that content. The way this is constructed, those rights are not. It's a closed market kind of situation. So you have one as an open market, the other is a closed market. But in terms of your earlier question, in terms of why wouldn't MLB go to a neutral form, it's a whole control thing, and they've not only done the Orioles and the Nationals, but every other team like the Red Sox and the Yankees and the Cubs and so forth that have equity in their own television situation. They've all been handled internally, and I think there was some fear that once this starts, this is the end of all this sort of thing, where these things are rendered internally. And then you've got all sorts of information getting out into the public record, and people like you and me see all this sort of thing once it gets into a potentially more open situation. So I think there's a lot of fear and unease of sort of getting this out of a internally controllable situation.
Eric Fisher joining us here, one of the most knowledgeable dudes I know in this space, Major League Baseball, digital media and technology writer at Sports Business Journal, and a hell of a resource for us to reach to on all of this MASN nonsense. I mean, Eric, I find out, and it's no shock, the fans know nothing about this, and it comes down to sort of whatever news can be parceled away. But I would wonder the long tail of this and talking to other people. I mean, you're in New York often and around people around Major League Baseball. I mean, I don't know that anyone has any sort of end game for this, right? Because neither side's going to give this up. At some point, someone in a legal environment will be solving this, right? This is going to wind up being solved by someone that someone's going to be very unhappy, I guess, in the end of this, right?
Yes and no. I think you sort of get halfway through an external situation such as a court ruling or something. I think the parameters get defined enough or closed in enough where they find a way to get to a settlement. I think ultimately this is still going to be settled. I think there's going to be a regional settlement agreement between Angelos and MLB relating to the original relocation of the Expos to Washington. I think it's ultimately, if I were a betting man, that ultimately gets redrawn, but that settlement comes through a dynamic that gets constrained or redefined in some fashion by an external ruling such as a court.
Do you think Angelos goes to bed every night and his kids thinking, we're going to have to pay them something at some point? Or do you really think that they believe in their heart of hearts they're not going to have to give up any of this $300 million nut that they're fighting over?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it lends itself to such an easy yes or no answer. I think there is, quote unquote, more money out there that will be paid. I think what they're trying to get a sense of that they feel like they don't have right now is a sense of respect and recognizance of the original agreement and what the original agreement was designed to represent. And I think from their point of view, they feel like all the activity that's happening now doesn't honor that, doesn't reflect that. And I think if there gets to be some sort of narrowed or defined discussion that honors that again, respects that again, that perhaps provides an avenue to a new discussion where the settlement does get redrawn, the Nationals do get more money, but again, comes about it at a slightly different angle, perhaps.
Eric, look into the Periscope here the next 6 months or so. What is next? You said there's more paperwork coming next week.
Yep.
What's the Nationals' next move? Or are they just sitting still and Major League Baseball says we're going to convene this RSDC? And when do we expect to get some new number out of their information?
Yeah, so there's more briefing that's going to be. There's a conclusion of briefing by the end of next week. All of the briefing on these essentially competing appeals where MLB and the Nationals want this thing sent back to the RSDC and then the Orioles and MASN to this neutral body. All the briefing against those competing motions, we'll see that by the end of next week. And then perhaps we may get some sort of ruling or direction on that in advance of July. And certainly the Orioles and MASN want to see something happen prior to that August date. They do not want to go back to the RSDC. They do not believe that's a fair and neutral venue to have this thing heard. So we're going to hear a lot more over the next 6 weeks. The next set of owners meetings is in mid-August in Houston. I think we're going to know a lot more before then. And, what happens before, subsequent, we'll have to wait and see what the court says. But the next 60 to 90 days are certainly going to tell us a lot.
I know you worked at the Washington Times for many years before you went to Sports Business Journal. Tom Lavero wrote a piece recently about how Major League Baseball sort of bet against Angelos and now has lost, right? And I know you were co-workers at that time on that beat and whatnot, but is this not shocking to the Major League Baseball owners? Because I don't think they could have expected it to ever get to this point, but it was... and I think, you're a guy that understands legalese better than me. It looks to me to be such an incredibly sloppy effort by the Major League Baseball people back in 2005 that 11 years later they're dealing with this nonsense.
It was a pretty intense couple of weeks there. There were a lot of marathon negotiation sessions because, they had already announced the team was moving. The funding for the stadium had been approved. They were already setting up team operations to play at RFK, and they'd renamed the team. A new logo had come. All these things had come into play, but yet you had the specter of this legal issue with Angelos hanging out there. There was a real push to try to sort of get this done and be able to get the season going. This was all late March, and you got a very complicated situation, and I think everybody probably did the best they could at the time. But I think, if you were really to sort of put the screws to everybody involved, would they have liked a little bit more time to sort through all of this and really think it all through, perhaps? Making deals in haste is never necessarily a good thing, and I think there may be a case to be made here that, this was not the most fertile of landscapes to put together a solution that really works for everybody, because clearly now we're in a situation where we've got a lot of unhappiness all the way around.
Well, we kind of sort of knew the Nationals were never going to get the fair shake, right? I mean, the deal was never designed to be really fair to the Nationals, and it put Peter in all the power. And I got this quote here from Rob Manfred that was reported in the Washington Times, and I know, you see this stuff too. And this is Manfred's words. The fundamentals are that the Orioles agreed that the RSDC would set the rights fees for MASN and the Orioles every 5 years. The Orioles have engaged in a pattern of conduct designed to avoid that agreement being effectuated. You agree with that, or do you not agree with that?
Well, I was in the room when he said that, and I was a little stunned to hear it. And again,
well, it's the first time he said much of anything on it, right? Literally, right?
Well, yet not exactly, because I asked him about he's been throwing messages on this for quite some time, and this was at the end of the May owners meeting. And at the end of the May owners meeting last year, up here in New York, I asked him about the MASN situation because we had just had this big hearing on the move to vacate the original RSDC ruling, and I asked him about it, and he told me that sooner or later the Nationals are going to get their money, and the MASN attorneys had a field day with that, and they're still having, a year later, they're still having a field day with that comment because, over and over again, Manfred has clearly signaled that he's not a neutral party in this thing. He's completely cast his lot with the Nationals on this dispute. And going back to your original question, yes, the settlement calls for rights fees disputes to be administered by the RSDC, but the Orioles have argued and actually successfully proven in court. The one ruling that we've got is that the RSDC did not act in a fair and reasonable manner, that there was all sorts of bias, and that's the one ruling that we actually have from
Well, those guys are literally getting a piece of the money. I mean, all of this money that goes into this pool, if $10 million goes to the Orioles and $10 million goes to the Nationals, by its very definition, $7 million goes to the other owners, right? I mean, it was designed as a poison pill, and now it's sort of poison for everybody, right? This balance, one team gets the same as the other, and a third of all of that goes into the general pool, of whom the RSDC is comprised. I mean, I don't don't know much about law, and I certainly don't want to take Peter's side, but there's definitely a conflict of interest if you're voting on your own money, right?
Well, yeah. Again, there's a whole other issue, which this is much bigger than MASN. That there has been someone there and among a variety of owners as to whether these kind of disputes should be ruled on by other owners, because they're in a club together, but this is a very competitive situation, and having one owner tell another owner what their budget should be or what their rights should be, and again, this sort of gets back to your prior question as to what the issue with going to a neutral party would be. And this is one of those issues out there, and I think they do have to solve, and baseball has to solve on a long-range basis how they're going to settle all of this out, because there is, spurred on by MASN, but not just MASN, that this sort of internal ruling, it doesn't hit everybody just right.
And the other part of this is it really creates a mess for a potential third team in New York or anywhere in New Jersey. Certainly the Bay Area and the two teams sort of co-join there. And what's going to happen that moving teams into markets now, Kansas City will suddenly claim every sheep in the Midwest, right? I mean, when you go to move a team, whose market you move it into and what value that has, right? I mean, the NFL just went through that on the LA side.
It's a related issue, but it's a different issue. But yes, that's a whole other situation. Again, not just MASN, but the territorial map is very odd. That you've got people in places like Des Moines and Las Vegas that are blacked out from a whole bunch of teams. You've got completely shared markets like the Yankees and the Mets and the Los Angeles teams, and then you have differing markets like Baltimore and Washington. You've got some overlapping markets. It's, Oakland, San Francisco have different counties. It's a complete mess. And that's a whole other subject that we could spend an hour on in terms of how they sort out the territorial map long term, because that's a hot mess as well.
All right, man. So enough of the MASN thing. How about those first place Orioles, Eric Fisher? Huh? Who knew, right? And Machado throwing punches. We got things happening on the field too, right?
It's not just this year. It was actually looking at this, that this really is, if you look at the entire history of the franchise, this is one of the glory periods, that they're actually now working on a fifth consecutive year of a 500 or better team, which has not happened since they ran off 18 straight between 68 and 85. This is actually the biggest run of sustained success for the Orioles in over 30 years.
And the ballpark's empty. It's insane. Literally, we've always thought, well, when they got back and they got relevant and they signed Davis and they bring their stars and, the way the business has been run in the offseason is incredible. Angelos didn't put the season tickets on sale until February. He didn't send the notes out to get paid until February because he didn't want to set season ticket prices until he had Chris Davis signed. It's affected lots of different things about beer sales and people downtown. But the team on the field has been fantastic, and to your point, it is a bit of a glory era when you're in first place in June. We don't have that kind of cooking around here. Meantime, Chicago's alive, right? I mean, there's some real engagement amongst young players, and I think one of the great stories of the All-Star game, it's going to be all of the young talent in Major League Baseball right now, and all of these guys that we sort of look at and say, that guy's going to get $300 million, that guy's going to get $300 million, and that's what we're trying to figure out here with Machado, obviously Trout, Harper down in D.C., that all of this money that Mr. Angelos fights over with the owners, this is the difference between paying Manny Machado or not in some cases.
Youth is, and I'm actually leaving in a couple hours to head up the road to the draft, which I've up as a caucus at the MLB Network studios, and I've been many years, and it's always a very interesting event because the first year I went many, many years ago, it was this sort of quiet thing. It almost felt like your local, rotisserie baseball, fantasy football kind of draft.
Without the wings and beer, right?
Without the wings and beer. And now it's become this really huge thing because everybody realizes that youth is king in this sport and player development is king, and signing 35-year-old free agents from somebody else's club, that is not a recipe for long-term success. And, it seems like the Yankees are now finding out the hard way, that, youth is really king. People are clued into the college scene and the minor league scene in a way that they've never been on any major level before. And, and to see this thing just continually grow year after year, it's really been interesting.
Hey, man, love having you on the show. Love the knowledge and the wisdom. I appreciate that you share it with us. I never have to worry. I follow Eric Fisher out on Twitter. Anything's going. Mr. Angelos pulling any shenanigans or Major League Baseball folks doing that in the middle of the night in the New York Supreme Court, Eric will be tweeting about it. Enjoy the baseball, man. At some point, beer, hot dogs, and a ball game, at some point in there, we got to work that in, you and me. That would be a fun night, man.
Absolutely.
Be well, man.
All right, you too.
It might be in October here in Baltimore if the Orioles keep that up. He is Eric Fisher at Sports Business Journal. You can definitely follow him. He's a must-follow, in my opinion. It's Eric Fisher, SBJ, out at Sports Business Journal on Twitter and out on the interweb, following all of the MASN Major League Baseball brawl, over $298 million and adding every day dollars at this point. You can find me out in the Buy Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app, our morning newspaper at 7 a.m. It hits your email inbox each and every day. That is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month, still the best workout, and still going to get you in shape here for what's left of the summer. It's still early. There's time to tone up and figure it all out. There's also time to get on the WNST tech service, whether it's Machado, suspensions, or appeals, or trades. You get it first on the WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And, of course, Dennis is here on Thursdays driving you home. I will be at Black Eyed Susan signing copies of Purple Rain 1 and 2 in Glendon, Maryland on Saturday from 11:30 until 2. Come, say hello. It's pre-Father's Day. If Dad's a Ravens fan, he'll love my books. They have happy endings. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.